The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Yeah, we're in the dog days here. We don't have training camp starting for another 3 weeks, but there are some things percolating. The NBA free agency door is open. It's opening up in hockey today. And oh, by the way, it's Bobby Bonilla Day. Bobby Bonilla is going to get a check for $1,193,000, $248.20. The same check that he has gotten for the last 14 years and the same check that he's going to get for the next 11 years. He has already collected $14 million. He will collect another $16 million on the deal. Oh, and yes, he's got another deal with the Orioles that pays him $500,000 a year. It's good to be Bobby Bo, isn't it? Career earnings over $50 million, and the money keeps rolling in. You know, the funny thing about the deal that he made with the Mets, not necessarily the one he made with the Orioles, and I guess the way today's dollars works, no big deal to stroke him a check for $500,000 every year, even though it's his career is in the rearview mirror. His last year at baseball was 2002. But if you go back to 2000, the Mets had released him. They released him in January, and they owed him $5 million. And Fred Wilpon was the owner of the Mets at the time. And he could have given Bonilla a check for $5 million and sent him on his way. And he did play a couple more years. In fact, he was a regular for the Braves the next year and played part of a year in St. Louis before he finally retired. But he said, I'll tell you what. Here's what we'll do. We'll give you deferred money because I have good use for that $5 million right now. And they worked out this deferred payment plan, which includes a check for over $1 million for every year going forward for another 11 years. So what is that, 2035, right? 2035, he's going to continue to get a check. And the reason that I blew the story there. The reason that Fred Wilpon wanted the $5 million is he wanted to invest it with Bernie Madoff. Yes. And he said, well, look at the return I'm getting from Madoff. It makes sense to do this. And, of course, we know the rest of the story on that. So that's what it goes back to. Actually, you know, Max Scherzer's still getting $15 million a year from the Nationals. That's a check I'd be happy to write with what Scherzer delivered. He was a bargain while he was here. It was a $210 million contract with like half of it deferred. So he's going to get that, I think, for another 6 years, $15 million a year. It's just staggering. As the man who once occupied this studio said, it boggles. It boggles the mind. The money is just insane. Speaking of that, with free agency open, not that the Wizards went nuts on this, but they did sign Jonas Valanciunas to a 3-year, $30 million contract. That's $10 million a year. That's less money than Marvin Bagley makes. And it gives them more flexibility as they try to acquire more draft capital. I mean, that's what it's all about for them in the next few years. And they've drafted Alex Sarr, who's hopefully the center of the future, but he's only 19 years old. Valanciunas, big physical guy, stays healthy, played 82 games for the Pelicans last year, 12 points, 8.8 rebounds a game. And he will give them somebody who can maybe mentor Sarr to some extent, and it gives them a trade piece because his contract doesn't have a team option or a player option. So as the year goes on, or maybe 2 years go by, they could deal him away, and it's a cheap option for another team with an expiring contract. So that's the way that works. Meantime, Paul George has signed with the 76ers. And I put a little extra emphasis on this because we know who owns the 76ers, right? Josh Harris. And he signed a guy who can be great. I mean, Paul George, one of the top players in the league when he plays. It's a 4-year, $212 million contract, and he'll be the second or maybe third superstar with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, who they've just worked out an extension with. But it's a 4-year, $212 million contract for a player who doesn't stay healthy in the playoffs, joining another player who doesn't stay healthy in the playoffs. And I don't know how this is being received in Philadelphia, but the honeymoon that Josh Harris is on here with the Commanders, mainly because he's not Dan Snyder, I don't know how this is playing in Philadelphia, but if Paul George and Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey are all healthy, can they take down the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals next year? Maybe. I don't know. George is 34 years old. He did not deliver what they hoped with the Clippers. They never even made it to a conference finals. Has great numbers, 23 points, 6 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 263 games he managed to stay healthy for. He's one of 8 players to make at least 9 All-Star teams since he came in the league. LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, James Harden, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, and Anthony Davis are the others, so he joins royalty there. Also a 6-time All-NBA selection, including first team in 2019. But the problem is he doesn't stay healthy. He had that gruesome broken leg it wasn't the Olympics, but it was the national team getting ready for the Olympics. And he made it back from that. That was as bad as Joe Theismann. But credit to him, made it back. Still a great player. But, to invest $212 million into a player that you may not be able to count on in the playoffs, how do you look at that? Caitlin Clark, I've been watching this show for the last couple of weekends. ESPN has been very smart about this. The WNBA has been very smart about this. They have been putting her games into a great spot. Last weekend, she played the Chicago Sky. I say she, her team, the Indiana Fever, played the Chicago Sky, Angel Reese, the big rivalry there. It drew 2 million people. The games that Caitlin Clark plays in, she averages 1.1 million viewers per game. Any other game that she doesn't play in, it's 400,000. And the average per game last year was like 300,000 people. So she draws eyeballs to the set, and putting it in that window where they put it, it's great because there's nothing else going on. At 3 o'clock, the Nats game was pretty much over. The Orioles didn't play until last night. And you could watch, I guess, the track and field time trials, and I think the gymnastics were at night. I mean, there was really nothing else on at that period of time. So I'm going to be interested to see what the number was for yesterday's game, where they played the Phoenix Mercury and the GOAT, Diana Taurasi, she's been in the WNBA almost as long as Caitlin Clark has been alive. This is her 21st season. Caitlin Clark is 22 years old. And remember, Taurasi was one of the ones who kind of stirred things up as Caitlin Clark was becoming the number 1 pick of the WNBA when she said, reality is coming. Well, the reality yesterday was that the better player on the court, as good as Taurasi is and as good as her team may be with Brittany Griner, the Indiana Fever had the worst record in the league last year, and a Caitlin Clark that got off to kind of a slow start, she's got it rolling now. And she performed yesterday. She came up, what was it, 1 rebound short of a triple-double. I got the numbers here. She had an excellent game. She had 15 points. She didn't shoot that much. She was like 4 of 14 from the field. But she got 12 rebounds and 9 assists. And her team won the game, 88-82. And Taurasi was very generous in her praise after the game and said nice things about her. It's amazing what Caitlin's been able to do in her short career so far. It's been nothing short of amazing. The only thing that I really love about her, she loves the game. You can tell that she puts the work in. That's the one thing that she really loves, puts the work in. So there's respect now, and Caitlin Clark has earned that, and the numbers are bearing it out that she is a godsend for the league. And Angel Reese may be playing her part well, and maybe, if you look at this as a drama, you could also say that Diana Taurasi is playing her part well. The 42-year-old senior citizen, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, women's college basketball player who ever lived, casting doubt on this kid. Reality is coming. And then Angel Reese playing the villain here, and they come in together like Magic and Bird. I mean, it's really working out well for the WNBA. And here I was 2 Sundays in a row, riveted to, because it was another close game, riveted to the television in the fourth quarter. That never happened to me before. And I have a daughter who played sports, and I love watching her play soccer. And she tried to play basketball, didn't work out too well for her. The team wasn't very good. But, I never thought that I would be as invested in Caitlin Clark and the WNBA as I am. And good for her and good for the league for putting on a product that people are watching And if you read some of the stories, their television deal, it's a huge bargain now, but it's going to quadruple in money for the league. They're flying now charter because of her, and the salaries, which are, they're topping out at like $250,000, they're going to jump up. She's got a $38 million shoe deal from Nike, so she's fine. But the rest of the league, players aren't making a lot of money. And the reason that Brittany Griner was playing in Russia was because she didn't make enough money in the WNBA. And, sadly, she got captured and spent almost a year in prison. So, yeah, so there's great things happening with them, and they got me. I'm in. I'm all in, which surprises me. All right, tonight I will be all in as James Wood makes his major league debut. Now, I've heard comparisons to Bryce Harper, that this might be the biggest Nationals debut since then. Remember, Harper made his debut on the road. It was against the Dodgers in Los Angeles. So his first major league game was on the road. He came back to great fanfare, but I think the bar was set so high with Steven Strasburg in 2010. We're never going to have anything like that again. But there's been great interest in James Wood, and people have been following what he's been doing in AAA, where he's hitting .346. He's played 51 games with the Red Wings and has in Rochester, and he's a local guy. That, I think, will help as well. He grew up in Rockville, went to St. John's. He actually was drafted by the Padres, but came here in the Juan Soto deal. And so he's going to be on the field tonight with two of his ex-teammates with the Padres. Mackenzie Gore will be on the mound, and C.J. Abrams, who's on his way to being an all-star with the Nationals, will be at shortstop. So it's really cool in that regard. And the hype for this, has been maybe as big as it's been for anybody in recent years. Mark Zuckerman has covered the Nationals since they came here from Montreal in 2012. He works for Masson, talking to Dan Kolko yesterday on the air about the debut of James Wood tonight.
Juan Soto, we all knew was a big deal, but it all happened so fast. He was, in single A a couple weeks prior to that. Howie Kendrick ruptures his Achilles, and the next thing you know, Juan Soto is in the big leagues. This one we've known about for a while. We've been trying to map it out. When's it going to be? So that's more similar to, say, a Steven Strasburg or a Bryce Harper, and certainly a rare situation where we already know 3 days in advance that it's going to happen. That's unconventional, to say the least. So this is a big deal. He has done everything they could have asked of him in the minor leagues. Probably would have been up here, to be honest, maybe even a month ago, if not for the little hamstring injury that he suffered. They wanted to take it slow with that, though, get him back, make sure he was fine. Everything's good. He is ready to go. And this is a team that's going to be very excited to welcome that player into their lineup, into the outfield. He has the potential to be a really impact player right from the get-go.
And if you want to see him at Nationals Park this week, nats.com/tickets is the place that you can visit for the reported major league debut of James Wood. Mark, before the hamstring issue, James Wood was raking, and something that Davey Martinez said is that he wanted James to get more experience against left-handed pitching. He wanted those numbers to improve a little bit and just feel more comfortable left on left. The message was received because James Wood's numbers against lefties have bumped up to a point that they're almost identical to his numbers against righties. This is no longer, at least at the AAA level, a concern.
No, and I think that's what's so encouraging here is all the things they asked him to work on, he's done and then some. You're right. It was kind of that one little thing left. Hey, how can you do against lefties? Obviously, the numbers there speak for themselves. But this is a guy, I know he strikes out a decent amount, who doesn't at this point, but he also draws his walks. So he knows how to work a count. He has plate discipline, hits the ball to all fields. Plays great defense. I think we're probably going to see him in left field when he's up here. That's where he played the last 10 days since coming off the IL. This is a physical specimen at 6'7", and yet he plays the game in a way that doesn't look like that you expect from somebody of that body type. Runs really well, plays great defense, good arm, hits for average, hits for power. I mean, this is legitimate 5 tools. And I not to say that C.J. Abrams and Mackenzie Gore weren't a big deal when they arrived here, but I think this was the player all along when they made the Juan Soto trade that you said has the potential to be a superstar, a Juan Soto type of player. Long way to go, of course, to actually see it now coming to fruition and be out on the field with 2 of those other guys who came in the trade as well. It's a big moment for the franchise.
And it's not official yet, but it's expected that James Wood will make his debut for the Nats tonight. And not to get too carried away with this, but maybe I am going to get carried away with this. as far as I can remember, the last Washington baseball player who was 6'7" and played left field was named Frank Howard. And Frank Howard is the best player in the history of the expansion Washington Senators, who were here from 1961 through 1971. He was the Big Bopper, the Capital Punisher. There's a statue of him outside of the park. He didn't have 6 arms, but okay, that's the way they made that statue. But he was a tremendous, tremendous thrill to watch. His at-bats were incredible. And it looks like Wood is a different type of player. I mean, he can run the bases. He's got really good speed and hits home runs and hits for, at least in the minors, hits for average. Howard did get his average up over 300 1969, but generally was a big bopper. Fit in well in today's game. And I'm not ready to make that comparison because by the time that Frank Howard came here, he had already been Rookie of the Year with the Dodgers. He was traded for Claude Osteen in 1964 and left with the team when they went to Texas in 71. But this is something that could be very, very exciting. And I continue to credit Mike Rizzo with rebuilding this team. And the Soto deal, though, they said goodbye to a guy who's probably going to be a Hall of Famer, is going to be one of the great players in the game for the next 12, 13, 14 years, whatever. You got a lot in return. Mackenzie Gore, okay, he's not a star yet, but he's become a dependable pitcher. He may get better. And C.J. Abrams looks like he's going to be an all-star, and they got him under team control for, I think, another 4 or 5 years. And then James Wood just getting called up tonight. So a lot of excitement for that. Big series. They probably are not really realistically in contention to contend for the wild card. We'll see what happens in the second half. But they finished up the road trip 3-6. They're 5 games under 500. The Mets have played a lot better now, and maybe they're going to make a run at a wild card. But this is a fun series, and a series that will include the annual July 4th game, which starts at 11 o'clock. So I'll keep an eye on that. Coming up, we'll look at what the Capitals did in the draft over the weekend, and also a little more follow-up on the Wizards as they held a news conference for the 3 draft picks, not at the team facility, not at the arena, but they had it at Union Station, which is interesting. It's that's not, and the acoustics suck, but I guess they wanted the people there. They had it on a Saturday. I don't know how many people showed up for this, but I'll play some of what Will Dawkins said and talk about what was the general theme as they introduced the 3 new players. We'll get to that and more as we continue. We got Tony back today at 11 o'clock. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
Yes, it's Bobby Bonilla Day as he gets a check for $1.1 million and is going to continue to get those checks for the next 11 years. Also, through 2029, he's getting $500,000 a year from the Baltimore Orioles. It's good to be Bobby Bo, and it's a happy birthday for me and maybe for you as a listener. It's not my actual birthday, but it's the birthday of sports radio. We started WFAN in New York 37 years ago today, and I'll have some memories of the beginning. In the next hour, we'll do that about 10:40, 10:45, looking back on how it all got off the ground, and I'll give you a couple of backstories as to how it was shaky at the beginning, and there was some question whether it was going to make it or not, but all these years later, we got sports radio stations all over the country, including 3 of them in this town, and I'm very proud to have started the first one here back in 1992. But we'll get to all that in a bit. We had the Caps doing their draft over the weekend. It started Friday night in Las Vegas, and they finished up on Saturday. They did round 1 on Friday night, and the Caps used the 17th pick to take winger Tarek Paraskak. And if you've seen the video, he's sitting with his parents, and they look stunned that he was taken. He looked stunned, too, because he didn't think he was necessarily going to go in the first round. He was sitting there in the stands, but he wasn't sure that he was going to be taken. But they took him. He's a little small. They have to build him up a little bit. But, he's a guy who they think has, as they say, an upside. The other players who were taken, if you know hockey, you know them better than I do. This is not like it's not like the NBA draft, though. That's becoming more and more of a who, what, huh? You know, it's all many foreign players, so it's not, you know, like it used to be where it was all college players and you knew them coming out. But they did do some wheeling and dealing, and they picked up a goalie, which we will get to. But overall, for what they did over the 2 days, Brian McClellan, the GM, seems quite satisfied.
Yeah, I thought we did really well. From, when we started the draft, I think everything worked out well. We got some good size on the wing. We got a couple good defenseman prospects. We got a goalie that can play with us, and a couple projects too. So I mean, we feel real good about what we accomplished.
The goalie, it's interesting. His name is Logan Thompson, not Logan Thomas, but Logan Thompson, and he was undrafted coming out of the Canadian college system. But he signed with the Capitals' minor league affiliate, Hershey, but went to the Hershey affiliate, South Carolina Stingrays. Somehow from there, he got a deal with the Las Vegas Knights, was part of a Stanley Cup champion there. He's now 27 years old. It's 5 years later. The Caps, as you know, traded Darcy Kemper to the Kings earlier this month. They've got Charlie Lindgren, who's 30 years old, and he's the expected starter. But Logan Thompson will be part of the backup.
Yeah, it's weird. I've never been traded before, so in juniors or pro. So a lot of emotions, still running through me, and it's going to take a couple days of process. The only thing I've ever known in the NHL is the Golden Knights, so it's going to be different.
You know what's cool though about his story, and this is really funny. He was scheduled because the draft was in Vegas, where he's been playing, where the Knights are. And he had arranged, either through the team or through somebody, to have a signing session. I don't know if it was charging for autographs, more of a PR thing for the Knights, but he was scheduled to do that on Saturday morning, and he wakes up to find out that he's been traded. But good for him. He went through with the autograph session.
I was in bed. I woke up. I had to be down here in an hour, so... Actually, it was a good alarm clock. So, but no, it was good. I woke up to that, and then obviously you get ready and come down, and I knew it was going to be an interesting day.
Was it an easy decision to come down and sign, or did you consider not?
Obviously, I'm still going to come down, and obviously for the fans, be around, and I won't be here much longer. So it is cool to come and just sign some stuff and say hi to people and buy. So no, it was easy to come down, and I wanted to see the Sphere. I haven't seen the Sphere yet, so got to check it out.
Good for him. Mensch. Yeah. I mean, he could have said, well, I'm no longer with the Knights. I'm not going to sign for Knights fans. I'm with the Capitals. No, but he showed up, did his thing, and did his interview session. So he'll be likely the backup, and he's a cheap backup because he's making $766,000 a year. Lindgren's making $1.1 million. So you get maybe your two top goalies are making less than $2 million combined. Now, both of them are going into the final year of their contract, so you may have to sign one or both of them. But, he's a guy who's they're familiar with because he was in that Hershey system 5 years ago and now has a Stanley Cup. He's 27 years old, and we'll give him some backup. They also traded forward Beck Malenstein to Buffalo for the Sabres' second-round pick, the number 43 overall. They took Cole Hudson from the U.S. national team development program. And he set a program record for points by a defenseman with 119 over his 2 seasons. So if you know your hockey, you know your stuff there, and if you don't, well, that's just stuff from what happened. And we'll see what happens in free agency. The Capitals have indicated that they're going to be a little bit aggressive in that. They're in this odd phase right now. They did make the playoffs, but they're still on the Alex Ovechkin watch. I think it's 42 or 43 that he needs to break Wayne Gretzky's record. So he's right on the cusp there. Can he do it in one season? We'll see. But what McClellan is saying is he's saying they're rebuilding, but they're also, looking to be a team that can compete, and they did compete enough to make the playoffs this past year. I don't think anybody's thinking Stanley Cup going into this season. And in some ways, you want to get the Ovechkin thing off the books. On the other hand, it's possible that you could have a team that could make a fairly decent run with Ovechkin as he chases the record. And, let's say he gets to 30, 32 goals this year. Well, it's going to have to be another year. And I don't know. That'd be another interesting thing to look at. If he does break the record this year, and he's still playing at a pretty high level, and he's still putting people in the seats, do you bring Ovechkin back for another year if he's the record holder? Do you let him, it's kind of like being a defending champion. Do you want to leave when you're on top? Do you want to retire as a champion? Or do you want to have like a victory lap year? So whether it's going to be 1 year or 2 years is going to depend on a lot of things for Ovechkin. But if he does break the record this year, yeah, he could say, I feel good, like to do this another year, and I think they'd like to have him back. Well, they would have no choice but to bring him back. There's no way that Ovechkin could say, even if he has the record, that he wants to play, and they go, well, we're ready to move on from you. So more than likely, he'll play as long as he wants to play, and the question is, will he have the record this year, or will it happen sometime during the 2025, 2026 season? All right, on to the Wizards as they introduce the big trio that they drafted. And kind of interesting that they had it at Union Station. That's a big, big hall. I'm sure you've been there before, and you could hold, several thousand people there. And I don't know how many chairs they had set up. I don't know how well publicized this was, but they wanted a fan base there as they introduced their three new players. Alex Sarr taken in the first round with number 2 pick. Bub Carrington, who's from Baltimore, played at Pitt. They took him 14 overall. And Keyshawn George from Miami, who they moved up from 26 to 24 to take. And they introduced all three of them. All of them, very excited to be here, saying all the right things. But it's a very... it's different than a lot of situations in the NBA because nobody's coming here saying, hey, if we got a break here, break there, we're going to compete and, we'll see how far we can go in the play. No, they're probably going to be the worst team in the league, maybe even worse than Detroit this year. Detroit just hired J.B. Bickerstaff, who was fired by Cleveland, and they may be an improved team this year. The Wizards are in this, they don't call it the process, but it's the process. And Josh Harris doesn't own the team. Ted Leonsis owns the team, and Ted has really never liked the process. But that's what's going on here. And this was Will Dawkins at this huge event at Union Station on Saturday, talking about the acquisition of the three players and what it means to the organization.
We walked into Wednesday night and had a plan in place. We wanted to be aggressive, and we walked out excited. Obviously, every transaction period, there's difficult decisions that you have to make, but we were aligned from top to bottom. We were strategic, and like we said, we were aggressive in making sure that we accomplished our goals. So with these three young men to my left, we feel like we're adding a few more bricks to that base level foundation that we talked about at the end of the season. We feel like they're our type of people first. They are our type of players as well. When you kind of look across the board and see them, they all are challenge seekers. They all are hard workers. They all care and have a passion for basketball. So the stuff off the court is checking the boxes there. But when you watch them play, the athleticism, the versatility, the two-way potential that they have on both ends of the floor, that stuff's really impressive and really exciting for us. So we're happy to add them all. I do got to show the scouts a little bit of love. We had a retreat in the offseason and talked about getting to players early, identifying players early. And I promise you to a man, these were three of the guys that we were on from the very beginning. The texts, the phone calls, you got to get here, you got to see them. And that just gives you more time to work with the information and feel more comfortable in your selection. So I got to give the scouts a lot of love on that. But lastly, before we officially welcome them, I want to make sure that we welcome their family. We want to make sure I welcome their friends, their representatives, the support staff, because you all really helped them get to this point. And they couldn't have done it without you. So I want to thank you guys.
Has kind of a pep rally feel to it, doesn't it? And here's something else. And if you look at where they are right now, and before you say, oh, well, that sucks, they're paying premium prices for tickets and all that. I think this is what they have to go through. And essentially, this is a minor league team right now. They may have players who develop into stars, but the Wizards are a developmental team. And Dawkins said that the rookies would receive a personalized development plan And he emphasized the role of Brian Keefe, the coach who got that full-time position after being interim, that Keefe got the job because of his ability to connect and get the most out of his players. They're all high-character guys, Keefe said. They obviously have the skills and talent, but really the most important thing for us is these guys are really about the process of improving. So I'm just excited to work with them and get them in the gym. This is a developmental team right now, and to be fair to Dawkins, sounds like he's being honest about this.
When we go through this process, Michael and I, it's important for transparency. Like, you can ask these young men, we tell them, this is what we're about, this is what we're going through, and we want people who see this more as an opportunity than like a negative or a challenge. And they're like, no, we want to help define what the next version of the Wizards looks like, and to a man, they embrace that. So we're going to push them. Brian's met with them and told them what it's all about. They've spoken to some of their teammates, but they're embracing that challenge.
Grab a Snickers, right? That's what they're telling you right now. Nobody's talking playoffs, and that's good because, Ted has said over the year, we're never going to rebuild. We're not going to do that. And finally, it got him off this nonsense of giving Bradley Beal a no-trade clause in his contract so they could be partners. This is what this is all about. And, they got Valanciunas from New Orleans, and they gave him a 3-year, $30 million contract, but it has no team option, no player option, so they can deal him. And that's what, if you're going to be a Wizards fan, invested as a Wizards fan for the next couple of years, maybe even 3 years, you can't judge this team on wins and losses because there ain't going to be many wins. They won 15 this past year. They may not match that. They may go under that this year. They came into last season knowing that it was a rebuild. And I think the over-under was like 24.5, and they went to 15. Next year, the bar might be set at like 16 or 17, maybe even lower than that. And you might want to go lower because they could very well be the worst team in the league, which would be fine because that would give them the most ping-pong balls to get Cooper Flagg. Even if they get Cooper Flagg, is this going to be a contending team the following year? No, probably not. And that's, when Dawkins talks about the foundation and the bricks at the bottom, they are at the bottom of this rebuilding process. They've just finished their first full year of it. They're going into year 2. They're never going to give you a time frame. They're not going to say, hey, in 5 years we expect to be a contending team. No, they don't know how the ping pong balls are going to fall. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know the players that they drafted, what kind of development they have. And is it possible? Could you have Keyshawn George be a star in this league in 2 years? Yeah, it's possible. Paul George, what was he, the 10th pick? And he's become one of the great players, just signed this huge contract to go to the 76ers, $212 million. So, yeah, we just don't know. But the way they're doing business now is so different than the way Ted has done it since he took over as owner. I think it was 2010. John Wall's first year was his first year as owner. And that was a rebuild, of course, because they had the number 1 pick because they were terrible. And they built around Wall, and they got to the second round. That's as far as they went. This team and the future, you want to be a championship contender, and they're going to do it, but they're going to do it like Orson Welles used to say, we'll sell no wine before it's time. We'll not be a playoff team until it's time. Coming up, Jayden Daniels said something to ESPN over the weekend, which ties in with what Brandon Aiyuk is saying about his future and the 3 possible teams that he could be playing for next year. One of them, burgundy and gold. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So we've been celebrating Bobby Bonilla Day. He got a check for over $1 million today, as he has for the last 14 years on July 4th, and he'll get the same size check for the next 11 years, not to mention the $500,000 he's getting from the Orioles and another deferred money deal. You can debate about finances, whether he did the best thing for himself financially. The Mets deal was a $5 million deal that he was due when he was released by them in 2000. And they said, rather than do that, we'll give you deferred money. And he just continues to collect year after year after year. If anybody in sports ever needed deferred money, it's Jamarcus Russell, the former number one pick of the NFL draft, arguably the biggest bust in history. Nobody number one has been, as far as I know, as bad as Russell was. He started 25 games for the Raiders over 3 years at a 52% completion percentage, 18 touchdowns, and 23 interceptions, and was essentially a sack machine. Brian Arakpo had a great year with sacks, but 4 of them, I think, were one game against Jamarcus Russell. But I laugh about it. It's a sad story. He was a great player in high school at Williamson High School in Mobile, Alabama. Big guy. And he went to LSU, and he had a great career at LSU. He threw for over 6,000 yards and 52 touchdowns in 3 years, and he had this rocket arm, which the late Al Davis loved. He fell in love with Jamarcus Russell's arm, essentially from either the pro day or the combine. I don't know what it was, but they decided to use the number one overall pick on him, and it was a tremendous mistake. And also, this is before the NFL put in a rookie salary cap. So he collected more than $36 million during that 3-year career with the Raiders and apparently saved nothing. He's been working as a volunteer assistant at his high school, Williamson High School, and he approached a local business owner about making a donation for the weight room. And the business owner, Chris Knowles, gave him a check for $74,000. Reportedly, Jamarcus Russell took that money, deposited in a credit union, and then took out $55,000, and they caught him. And now he's facing a lawsuit. He is not allowed to be on the school's campus. They fired him. Well, he wasn't making a salary, but they fired him. And he showed up at a football team event this week and was told that he wasn't welcome. This is a statement from the school district. Earlier this week, it was reiterated to Mr. Russell he is not permitted to be around the football program or on the school campus. This is probably the greatest player they've ever had from that high school, a former number one pick of the NFL draft. But boy, the times that he has fallen on, that he is allegedly taking a $74,000 check that was meant for the weight room, putting it in his own account and drawing $55,000 out of this. I mean, Allen Iverson, his agent, when he made a deal with Reebok, and Allen Iverson became a star. Allen Iverson was a great player in the NBA. But when he made a deal with Reebok, his agent was smart enough to have $30,000 of that deferred until he turns 55 years old. So I think that's another, I don't know how old Iverson is. I could probably figure this out. Let's see. 1996, which was, 28 years ago. He was about 20. So he's about 48 years old, something like that. So he's got about 6 or 7 years left until he becomes eligible for that money. And probably a very, very smart thing because Iverson was broke. I guess he makes money now because he's doing some commercials. He does some work for the Sixers and so forth. But, this is an old story in sports, and this is yet another chapter of that where you got a quarterback who made $36 million and now is accused of stealing money from a donor who was donating money for the weight room. Crazy. You've been following what's been going on with Jayden Daniels and Brandon Aiyuk. They were teammates only for a year. They were only a year teammates at Arizona State because Daniels was a freshman and Aiyuk was a senior, and he left for the NFL. And then, Daniels left and he went to LSU. But they've apparently maintained this great friendship. And this broke either last week or the week before that they had put out on TikTok that they were doing a FaceTime, and Aiyuk said, the 49ers don't want me anymore. And Daniel said, for real? And he says, yeah, let's go. And meaning let's become teammates. And that, of course, in a dead period of time when there's nothing going on, there's no training camp or anything like that, there's no even off-season workouts, it gets the juices flowing. Oh, wow, Aiyuk, and Adam Peters, the general manager, he worked in the 49ers organization. Let's make a deal, and he's going into the final year of his rookie contract. He's going to make $14 million, but he's looking at the top of the line rate for wide receivers, which is about $35 million a year. And he says, he hasn't said that, but the indication is he wants that. And, he's looking to go someplace else if he can't get it from the 49ers. So during an appearance on The Pivot this past Friday, Ryan Clark does that. It's a podcast. Aiyuk was on, and he was asked what uniform he will be in for the upcoming season, the 2024 season. And he said, if I were to take a guess, probably a Niner uniform. If not a Niner uniform, probably a Washington Commander uniform. If not a Washington Commander uniform, probably a Steelers uniform. Now, the Steelers have George Pickens, Van Jefferson, Roman Wilson. It's not a great wide receiver group. And you have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as the quarterbacks. Those are two veteran guys. You know, maybe they are looking at Aiyuk as the missing piece there. Whereas here, you have Terry McLaurin. You have Jahan Dotson, who had an off year last year, but, you know, maybe steps up with a bigger year. They took Christian McCaffrey's brother, and they think he can be a big contributor this year. So it leads to, you know, more speculation because there's not much going on here. Now, he's a great receiver. He had 75 catches for 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. He had 1,000 yards the year before. But he's got some, you know, he's not the number one there. They got Deebo Samuels. They got George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the league. There's a lot of things that draw attention that help him in San Francisco and probably is a good deal to stay there. Anyway, Daniels was on ESPN over the weekend to talk about a variety of things, including, you know, what he's going to wear to the ESPYs in a couple of weeks. He's going to be honored, I guess, as the top college football player since he won the Heisman. And so they got to this question, gee, have you been FaceTiming anybody recently?
Oh, man, you know, this is my best friend, man. It's my brother. We talk all the time. So, you know, it's just two friends just communicating. You know, I talk to them all the time daily. So, yeah, man, you know, I talk to him, but it's nothing crazy. You know, I just want the best for him, whatever that is, man. I hope he gets paid. I hope he gets what he deserves. But at the end of the day, man, I'm just a brother that's looking out for him.
Take it for what it's worth. There's two ways to look at this, I think. One is, okay, you got a rookie quarterback. You want him to feel confident out there. You want him to have a wide receiver who he's had chemistry with in the past. They're very good friends. You know, maybe that's something that could help to spark his development. On the other hand, getting him would smack of the old regime. And it just seems like everything they do is to go in the opposite direction of that. There's no doubt in my mind, if Dan Snyder still owned the team, that Brandon Aiyuk would be wearing a Washington uniform this season. They got cap room. They could fit him in. They could give him the long-term deal. They could overpay him as they have in the past. And, you know, they wouldn't worry about egos and that he'd be making more money than Terry McLaurin. He's probably a better receiver than Terry McLaurin, although McLaurin's really, really good. So, you know, I don't think this is going to happen, but it leads to interesting yak and an interesting conversation. But, you know, once training camp starts in a few weeks, we'll have other things to talk about. And I do think, and I think Aiyuk is right. I mean, the reality is more than likely they're going to work something out in San Francisco. And even if they don't, the 49ers can say, yeah, hold out if you want. But, you know, it's not going to do you any good. And if you do, we're just going to franchise you. And he knows that too. So eventually they'll work something out. But it's good to have other places that you can use for leverage, and he's using Pittsburgh and Washington as the two places. I don't know why necessarily Pittsburgh, other than their receiving core isn't very good, but you don't know about these two quarterbacks. I mean, you've got maybe a has-been in Russell Wilson and a Justin Fields who has shown some promise, but he's not even going to be the starting quarterback when the season starts, it looks like. And he's in the last year of a rookie deal as well. So that might not be the best situation for him. Orlando Cepeda died over the weekend, 86 years old, and just a couple of things from his obit. Very sad in the way his post-baseball career went. He retired in 1974, finished up with the Royals, and then was arrested for showing up at the airport with to get a large shipment of marijuana, spent 10 months in jail for that, and it really delayed him getting into the Hall of Fame. It took him a lot longer to get in than he should have, and he got in with the Veterans Committee, not with the writers. And he was a great, great player with the San Francisco Giants. He was absolutely terrific. He helped win a World Series for the St. Louis Cardinals. And just a couple of things. One, the what-if story. He was a great baseball and basketball player in his youth, and he was signed when the Giants were still in New York in 1955. He signed out of Puerto Rico. And his father died just before he played his first professional game for a minor league team in Salem, West Virginia. He spent the $500 bonus that he had gotten to sign with the Giants to pay for his father's funeral, and had to be persuaded to come back to Virginia to finish his baseball, or to continue his baseball career. And, what if? I don't think it would have happened. I think a scout would have eventually gone over there. But what if he had stayed retired? We never would have seen a guy who was an incredible baseball player. And in reading the obit, there are great players in today's game, no question about it. But let me just read this one paragraph, and I'll play the old guy here. Well, I do that every day. But he said he had one of his most productive seasons in 1961 when he led the league with 46 homers and 142 runs batted in, ahead of Willie Mays and other stars, including Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, and Ernie Banks. He finished second to Robinson in voting for the Most Valuable Player award. I mean, just think of the guys at that time competing for the home run title. Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, Ernie Banks, and Orlando Cepeda. We have great players in the game today, but it's just indicative of how great baseball used to be and how many great players were in the game and how many more recognizable players there were. Now, you could probably make an argument that there are as many stars in today's game, but Willie Mays, who just passed away, arguably the greatest player ever lived. Hank Aaron, I think the greatest clean home run hitter. Ernie Banks, the greatest player to never appear in the postseason. I think you could probably say that. His Cubs never made it, Mr. Cub. And Frank Robinson, who is as good as anybody who ever played the game. He's a top 10, maybe even top 5 player. And, you look at that and you say to yourself, what is baseball now compared to what it was then? Well, it was the national pastime then. In 1961, we didn't have a Super Bowl. We had professional football. We just had the launch, 1960, of the AFL. The NFL had 14 teams, and it was just, we had expansion teams like the Cowboys coming in. It wasn't on the radar as much as baseball was, and people loved baseball. People still do, but it's a shrinking number, and it's a smaller percentage of the pie. And when you talk about those names, those are the names that I grew up with, and maybe you did as well. And you look at that was just 1 year, 1961. All of those players in their prime, all those players. So to get to that top, think of the people that he had to pass to do that. And he did not deliver a World Series for the Giants. He also had some problems with his manager, Alvin Dark, who thought he was, what they call jaking it because of an injury, and he was angry that he was playing Spanish music in the clubhouse, and Willie Mays had to step in for that. I mean, there's probably a lot of racism that went on at that time, not just for blacks, but for Hispanic players as he was. So a great baseball person and someone who had some problems post baseball, but fortunately, I think got in the Hall of Fame. Orlando Cepeda passing away at the age of 86. Coming up in the next hour, Dan Quinn was on a podcast with Scott Kaplan. I know we've had a lot of Dan Quinn interviews, but there's a few things that I pulled out of there which I think are very instructive about him. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Well, happy birthday to you and me, because you and I are connected in this way. Sports radio was born on this day in 1987. I, as a participant in the process, and maybe you as a listener then, or certainly now if you're listening to this, here we are 37 years later. It's still alive. It operates in a different form, but it's still going. And those who said this will never last, well, fie on you. I have an old Tom Knott column from the Washington Times when we launched what was then 570 in 1992. And he said, forget it. It works in New York because they got a zillion teams, but it's never going to work in Washington. Well, it's working in Washington to the tune of 3 stations, and it continues to thrive in New York and other cities, and I'm very proud to have been part of the start of it. And I think I'm one of like 3 or 4 who were on the original staff who are still at it. Susan Waldman is doing the Yankee games. Howie Rose is doing the Mets, and Jody McDonald does radio in Philadelphia and New York. I think he even still fills in at the Fan from time to time in New York. A lot of the old timers have just retired in recent years, people like Steve Summers and John Minko. But I was there from day one, and I'll tell you some stories about it a little bit later this hour. Meantime, just keeping an eye on what's going on and things percolating. No surprise, the Nationals have promoted James Wood, so he's expected to be in the lineup tonight, and Eddie Rosario has been designated for assignment, so that'll be the big hoo-ha tonight at Nats Park as James Wood, 6'7", power, speed, left fielder, makes his major league debut at the age of 21. He's from Rockville, went to St. John's High School, actually was in the Padres organization, but came here in the Juan Soto trade, and now he's going to be on the field with 2 of his ex-teammates. As Mackenzie Gore is the starting pitcher tonight, and C.J. Abrams, the shortstop, who probably is going to be an all-star this year and is on his way to hopefully a great career with the Nationals. And, yeah, you'd love to have Juan Soto, but if you can't have Juan Soto, it looks like the fruits that he has borne are starting to ripen and pay off. And if Wood, it's not Woods, but Wood, W-O-O-D, if he can be a big factor, it could be an exciting rest of the summer at Nats Park. So that's a 6:45 start tonight. Orioles are off. They're headed to Seattle. They got clobbered last night. They lost 11-2 to the Rangers, but the Yankees have cooled off a little bit, so they're actually still percentage points ahead of New York in the standings. All right, Scott Kaplan is a former athlete, was a kicker at Pitt, and he's been in San Diego for a long time. I've known Scott for quite a while. He used to work with Billy Ray Smith, who was a great football player at Arkansas and later played for the Chargers, and now he does I think he does radio in L.A., but does a San Diego-based podcast. And he had Dan Quinn on the other day. Now, this is vacation time in the NFL. Once they broke minicamp last week or the week before, they're not due to get back until the rookies report on July 18th. But looks like Dan Quinn, like Ron Rivera, doesn't mind going on these shows. Rivera was on these shows all the time. And I don't know what Kaplan's connection is with Dan Quinn, but he got him to take some time from his vacation to do a podcast that he does with a couple of his buddies. And, you know, I know you've heard a lot from Quinn since he was hired. His news conference went like an hour, and when he was hired, and he's done, you know, the usual news conferences that you do during the offseason workouts and the mini camp and all those things. So he's been very, very accessible. But there are some things that you talk about in a podcast that you don't necessarily cover in the daily news conferences. So I pulled out some of the comments that he made, and just to let you know where he's at and things that he said that you might not have heard before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But there's about 4 what we call sound bites from Dan Quinn from this conversation that he had on the Scott Kaplan podcast. And the first one is about the opening message that he gave to his team. This is when he took over and had his first team meeting when OTAs started, which I guess would have been in April. Is that right? Maybe March, probably April. And this was the message that Quinn wanted to deliver as the new coach of the Commanders.
You're putting a whole group together for the very first time, and wanted to make sure you really establish what's most important to you, Scott. And so for me, that was establishing, competition was going to be the driving theme in all that we did, and finding ways to compete, not just against, a teammate or someone else. That's part of it, but not exactly it. It's just really to see like how good you can get, how far you can take it, the connection that'll have to take place. And I probably said something along the lines, there's 4 months or so until we open the season, and how good we'll get will depend on these relationships and the connection that takes place over these 4 months. Because if we have that part right, then the scheme and the other things can fall into place. But if you don't have the connection to really go bust your ass for the guy right next to you, there'll probably be a ceiling about where you can get to. And so I'd say more than anything, that probably drove the starting part of things.
So that was the message. these are your teammates. Bond with them. Terry McLaurin was talking about this. He said they didn't really even talk football for the first few days. Remember, he had offensive players mixed with defensive players because they pretty much spend their time separately during the season. So that's what it was all about. It was like a bonding thing. Maybe they should have gone off to a retreat somewhere to do that so they could all become, good friends. You don't have to necessarily become great friends with your teammates, but what he said is you have to be able to bust your ass for your teammate, for the guy next to you. That's what it is. Here's another part of this, and maybe if you felt the same question I did on this. This is an era in the NFL where they're hiring offensive-minded guys who are in their 30s. Okay, those are the two boxes that they're checking. And look, we just had an offseason where a coach with 6 Super Bowl championships couldn't get a job. Right? He's 72 years old, which goes against him. So they're looking for young, and they're looking for offense. Dan Quinn is 53, and he's defense. He's a defensive coordinator. So he doesn't, fit the mold of the coach that you're looking for these days. And this is Quinn presented with that and how he responds to it.
I wasn't really concerned on that. Only because I think, you still got to deliver, whether you're an offensive, coordinator or defensive coordinator, making sure like the units that you're charged with, are ready to get it on and do their thing. It is offensive in that way and scoring, and that's obviously what sells a lot in our league. So I'm definitely going to come back in my next life as an offensive coordinator for sure. I know what really bothers you, so that's what I do. But I now get to do that a little bit as a head coach, so that's a cool thing too.
Yeah.
But I think I wasn't stressed on like, would I get the op? I knew I wasn't going to chase it because I'd been a head coach before. And I think if you haven't been one, then you got to go. You got to take them wherever that is, because it's hard to have patience having never, sat in that seat before. But I had a pretty good gig. I enjoyed what I was doing. But if there was somewhere that really lit me up, that I could go do things in the fashion that we needed, I was going to go for it, because it was pretty unlikely there was going to be a third op at this. Yeah. So I was going to make sure if I had this chance again, man, like I was absolutely going to go for it as hard as anybody could.
And if you talk to people in the organization, both on and off the record, but more importantly off the record, Quinn was at the top of the list early on. I know when he was hired, it was greeted with, okay, retread, 53 years old, defensive guy. Last time we saw his work, his Cowboys were getting run over by the Green Bay Packers, right? But, he was somebody that they wanted, and somebody who had a background that they liked, and also the right type of person for an organization that had been just a disaster for years. The culture that they used to talk about. He really hasn't thrown that word around as much. Ron Rivera used to beat his chest about how he changed the culture. He really didn't. It was an impossible situation, obviously, with what he walked into. Remember, the team was still named the Redskins, and we hadn't had all the Washington Post reporting about the toxic culture when he was hired. So he had a difficult, to say the least, a difficult thing to overcome there. So Quinn, in many ways, the fact that he was 53, that he had been a head coach before, might have actually worked in his favor here for what they were looking for this situation. Will he be the coach for 10 years here? Yeah, you hope so. But if he's not, at least he sets them on a path where they got some stability. And maybe in this case, the age may have worked in his favor to some degree, and the fact that he had coaching experience before. As far as, and this was, it's funny you hear about his age, 53. Joe Gibbs was 52 when he retired the first time, and he was burned out. I mean, he didn't use that term, but, he worked himself to death, and the pressure of winning had gotten to him. He won 3 Super Bowls, went to 4, and in his last year, they made the playoffs and won a playoff game, but it was a disappointing year. And he couldn't deal with that anymore, and I don't blame him. So he stepped away for a long time, came back, and, relative to what happened under Dan Snyder, he was successful. He was there for 4 years. They made the playoffs twice. This is Quinn he didn't use the term workaholic, but when asked about work-life balance, he said this.
I don't always have balance. And that's the honest to God truth. So you strive for that, but I'm not the model for that. But what I do know is you do have to protect your time and make sure that you're staying disciplined into a routine and into a schedule, because that can help too. Sometimes just a few hours on a Friday night, to get away, knowing that all the work has been done for a game plan in the off season to make sure you're kind of sticking to a schedule. Those are things that help. But in the summer, I do like to read. I like to, try to move away when you can, but I'm not great at this, and I don't have balance. But it's also kind of a lifestyle, coaching is. It's not just a job, because it takes you deeper. But in season, it's way harder. That's for sure.
Yeah. So and that's typical. You'll hear that from coaches, that Friday afternoon is really the only time off that you have during a season. You're totally consumed with it. And given the fact that he's wanted to get back in since the Falcons fired him, he's been in the league, but wanted to get back in as a head coach, you can understand in his first year here that he's going to be consumed with it all the time. And while he is on vacation, here he is doing a podcast talking to these guys about football. Last thing from that was his relationship with Pete Carroll. Remember that's where he kind of got his start, working for Carroll when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl. And because of the success that they had there, that's how he landed the Falcons job. And so they asked him about his relationship with Pete Carroll and what he had learned with him during that time.
You can work really hard and have a good time doing it. And because that's what we did, like the work that we put in, we absolutely went after it. The teaching, the engagement, the way that we orchestrated practice, game planning, but we also had a blast doing it. And sometimes you can hear of coaches in this grind and all the ones that goes down, and like you can also really enjoy what you're doing. Like you guys here, I can feel your energy on the show. Like you guys enjoy what you're doing. And so you work really hard at it too. So he had a huge impact on me. And I've been around some really good coaches. And one interesting one was like I was around Nick Saban and Pete Carroll, both, within 2 years of one another. And the thing I learned was like they were both really philosophically ironed out. You walked into the building, you knew exactly how you got it on. They just did it in entirely different ways. And what a good example, like for, a young head coach coming into things, man, like don't try to be somebody else. You have to be you and do it in your own way. Because if somebody else tried to be, Browner or you, it just wouldn't come off authentic, because they're not being themselves. So I think that was another good message for me that I learned from both Nick and Pete. These were, two of the best coaches that I've ever been around, and arguably, two of the best that's ever done it. And they both had their own way. They just did it with different personalities, but it was really clear that, like, everybody in the organization knew how things got down.
So that's some of the highlights of the Dan Quinn podcast that he did with Scott Kaplan. You can find the whole thing on YouTube. I don't know if this is a comp here, but it might be. Mike Locksley had his shot to be a head coach several years ago. I forget if it was New Mexico or New Mexico State, and it was bad. Like they won 3 games over 2 years, and he got fired. And he went and worked with Nick Saban for several years, helped him to recruit some really great players there, including Tua Tagovailoa, and they won the national championship. And a lot of things happened for him while he was there as an assistant. He's always been known as a great recruiter. But as far as a head coach, his one shot, he performed poorly in that. And who knew if he'd get another job? Well, he got the opportunity here when DJ Durkin was fired after the tragic death of a player from heat stroke, a player that actually Locksley had recruited to Maryland when he was an assistant there. And so he comes back as the head coach. And I think Mike Locksley's done a hell of a job. And I think working for Nick Saban, whatever it was, 3 years, 4 years he was there in Alabama, that's really, I don't know, it's changed him, but it certainly helped him as he's become a head coach. And, yeah, Maryland's not going to compete for a national championship. They're not going to be really in the same league with Michigan and Ohio State, though they did give Michigan a great game in College Park this year. So they can be competitive, and they have been competitive with Ohio State at times, and they almost beat them when they had Dwayne Haskins. But the reality is they're not going to compete for a Big Ten championship. But Locksley's got a program that's a consistent bowl team, and I think realistically for Maryland football, that's what you ask. So intersecting with a coach like that really helped him, and Dan Quinn, having now had all this experience working with Saban, I guess it was brief, but working for a long time with Pete Carroll, and then having the opportunity to be a head coach, having it not work out, though he did get them to the Super Bowl, which they should have won. They were up 28-3. But didn't happen. Lost his job in Atlanta, comes back, defensive coordinator with the Cowboys. Now another opportunity. Let's see. And I think we saw a different Mike Locksley as a head coach in his second go-round when he got back to Maryland. And maybe Dan Quinn becomes that guy in Washington. But in terms of what he said in this interview, a little different than what he's been doing in these news conferences since he became the head coach. All right, that's enough for me. Tony is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.